Abimelech. That's our word for today. Many of us associate the name Abimelech with that mighty warrior that we read about in Judges chapter 9. But I discovered that Abimelech was more than just a name. Abimelech was actually a title too. And it was a title used by a number of Philistine kings. And literally translated, Abimelech means father of a king. But for our little deep dive today, we're going to be looking at the Abimelech that we are more or less familiar with in Judges chapter 9. And we're going to be looking at verses 50 to 52. And verse 50 reads thus: Then Abimelech went to Thebez and camped against Thebez and took it. But, and I love this but in verse 51. But, so here is this mighty man. Went to Thebez, camped against Thebez, and took it. But there's always a but. But there was a strong, fortified tower. Where? In the center of the city, and all the men and women, with all the leaders of the city, fled to it, and shut themselves in, and they went up on the roof of the tower. So here comes Abimelech with his crew, with his mighty men to back him up. Went to Thebez, camped against it, and took it. Which means they stepped in, they came, they saw, they conquered. But there's this strong fortified tower in the center of the city. So I want us to just sit in this strong fortified tower in the center of the city for a brief moment. Because isn't it like life, and isn't it like people that we encounter in this life to just come at us like Abimelech? Think of all the challenges and the challenging people with whom you have to deal. Whether you work with them, whether you live with them, whether you encounter them every now and again. You know, like the Karens, with all due respect to my dear friend Karen, but you know, the Karens in this life, the male Karens and the female Karens, is this man. He had done so much damage prior to even getting to this verse. Because if we go a step up to verse 49, so every one of the people also cut down his branch and followed Abimelech. And they put the branches on top of the inner chamber and set it on fire over those inside, so that all the people in the tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. So here is Abimelech coming hot off a victory. Hot off a victory where he had caused the death and destruction of 1,000 men and women. Now 1,000 men and women, that's not something to sniff at. That's a whole lot of lives. And I'm sure children were there too. They probably didn't count the children, but children were there too. So it's 1,000 men and women, and families displaced, lives messed up, people wiped out. Maybe a whole family, a whole bloodline could have been lost in all of that. he's all puffed up and, feeling, yes, I've done that. I've conquered that. I've conquered those. I've killed those. I can now step in and do the same thing here in Thebes. But aren't you just absolutely glad? Aren't you just absolutely grateful for the buts? The buts in life? So when the Abimelechs come and they're taking you from every angle, some come from so, some come from so, some coming from behind, and all these Abimelechs are coming at you. But, mighty God, but there was a strong fortified tower in the center of the city. And I am so excited about this because it just speaks to me of the safety I have in running into Christ. I can run into Christ. Christ becomes my strong fortified tower. Christ is your strong fortified tower. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, the Lord is my fortified tower. And when everything is taking you from out left field and every other field, is our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble. Here, the inhabitants of Thebes were in a similar situation as many of us find ourselves. And they had a literal and actual tower that they could run to. But we have better than a tower. We have better than a tower that is constructed of stone and steel, or whatever it is that they use for their building material back then. We have an everlasting tower that we can run to. The righteous run into it and they are saved. When the Lord gives the psalmist rather gives us this image of the secret place of the Most High, it's way better than where the inhabitants here of Thebes had to hide. And I just want us to understand and to realize just how much Christ is willing to protect us, how much he's willing to put a hedge around us, how much he is willing to hide us. And when we are in the safety, when we have the safety net of Christ thrown over us, nothing, the gates of hell cannot prevail against us. So when the gates of hell come in the form of an Abimelech, and we have our strong tower, which is Christ our King, who can stand against us? Who can snatch us from his hand? Nobody. We are safe. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And if we have a Psalm 91 situation and trouble taking us on one side and trouble taking us on the other side, we have our King Jesus, and he can do for us so much more than we could ever even think of doing for ourselves. While I was reading that and getting all excited about this strong fortified tower, a little sexism had to creep in, because when I read a little further down at verse 53, but a certain woman threw an upper millstone down on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Sexism isn't in yet, but we're getting there. So this woman, and based on what I read, an upper millstone is about 18 inches across. But just think of what my peeps call a big rock stone, a big old rock stone. And she's in this tower, and she lets that fall from how high, I don't know. But it came crashing down and it crushed his skull. But he wasn't dead. Half dead, perhaps, but he wasn't dead yet. What was Abimelech's concern? What was of greatest importance to him in his dying moments? Not worried about maybe children he was leaving behind or loved ones. He wasn't thinking, what is going to happen to my wife and my children? What was his concern? His concern was that it was going to go down in the annals of history that he had been slain by a woman. Seriously? Seriously? At a time like this, that is your only concern? So he called his armor bearer and said, come. Finish me off. I cannot have history recording anywhere that I was killed by a woman. And let us tiptoe a little back to this woman before even Abimelech spoke. Back to the woman. Who is this woman? A nameless woman. Another nameless woman. You know, there are several nameless women in the Bible. But as nameless as this woman might have been, and as nameless as she is to us today, she did a very powerful thing. Because that's another thing too, you know. I find that a lot of nameless women in the Bible, even if they had no name, they did acts that made them history makers. So you don't need a name to make history. You can make history without a name. And anytime you're thinking that your name isn't significant and nobody knows you, etc., you don't need a name to make a name for yourself. You don't need a name to be remembered. It's what you do that creates an impact. But anyway, that's for another time. So, this nameless woman does a marvelous, magnificent act. Whether it was good or bad is not the point here. Him to call his armor bearer to come and do the honors, as it were. Because for him, anything else would have been akin to gross, historic indignity and ultimate disgrace. The passage goes on to say that when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, each departed to his home. Gone. You chop off the head of the snake, and that's it. Everybody gone. All right, see you. We have a tower not made by hands, but a tower that can stand the test of time. A tower that can save us. As a matter of fact, a tower that does save us time and time again. So whenever the Abimelechs, whether they come in human form or they take the shape of a situation, let us not forget our fortified tower in the middle of our city, in the middle of our lives, our Christ. I will see you again when I come for another deep dive into my Father's business.